The California sun beat down on my skin as I stood in front of the ornate full-length mirror, staring at my reflection with a mixture of excitement and hollow dread. My wedding dress, an elegant A-line with delicate lace detailing, hugged my figure perfectly. Everyone said I looked beautiful, but the empty feeling in my chest persisted as I thought about the two vacant seats that would be glaringly obvious during the ceremony. Natalie, 10 minutes until we start, my best friend and maid of honor Eliza called through the door. How are you holding up? I forced a smile, though she couldn't see it. I'm fine, just finishing up. That was a lie, I wasn't fine. I was marrying the most supportive, loving man I could have ever hoped to find, but the day felt incomplete. My parents had chosen not to attend. The invitation I'd sent weeks ago had gone unanswered, despite my follow-up calls that were met with vague excuses and eventual silence. I knew why, of course. It was the same reason they'd missed my college graduation, my first award as a rising structural engineer, and every other significant milestone in my life. They were probably attending some event for my sister, Claire, their golden child, their pride and joy. Claire with her perfect hair, perfect smile, and seemingly perfect life. Claire, who could do no wrong in their eyes, while I remained perpetually in her shadow. Growing up in San Diego, I had always been Claire's little sister. My achievements were acknowledged with distracted nods, while hers were celebrated with dinner parties and effusive praise. When I brought home straight A's, my father would pat my shoulder and say, "That's nice, Natalie," before turning his attention back to whatever Claire was doing. When I won a prestigious scholarship to study engineering at Berkeley, my mother simply remarked that Claire had received 3 scholarship offers during her senior year. It wasn't that they were cruel exactly. They provided for me materially, ensured I had a good education, and occasionally remembered my birthday. But there was always a distance, an emotional wall I could never scale. Their love felt conditional, measured against Claire's accomplishments, and I invariably came up short. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. "Come in," I called, quickly wiping away a stray tear. The door opened to reveal my Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, and the only member of my immediate family who had consistently shown up for me. Her face softened with understanding as she took in my expression. "Oh, honey," she said, closing the door behind her, "you look absolutely stunning." I tried to smile, but my lips trembled. "Thanks, Aunt Susan, I just wish." "I know," she crossed the room and took both my hands in hers. "I tried calling them again this morning." My heart leaped, and the sympathy in her eyes told me everything before she spoke. "They're not coming, Natalie. Your mother said they had a prior commitment." "A prior commitment," I repeated, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. What could possibly be more important than their daughter's wedding? Susan's hesitation made my stomach clench. "Claire's art exhibit opened in New York today. They flew out yesterday." The pain that lanced through me was so sharp I almost doubled over. Of course, Claire's exhibit. I'd heard about it from mutual friends but hadn't realized the date coincided with my wedding. Even if they had, I couldn't imagine my parents would choose it over watching me get married. But they had, again, Claire had one without even trying. "Right," I said, my voice hollow. "Well, that's fine." "It's not fine, Natalie," Susan said firmly. "It's unacceptable, but you know what? Today isn't about them. It's about you and Daniel and the beautiful life you're going to build together." I nodded, drawing strength from her words. Daniel, my rock, the man who had seen me, truly seen me from the moment we met, who had never compared me to anyone else or found me wanting, who believed in my dreams and encouraged me to pursue them even when they seemed impossible. "You're right," I said, straightening my shoulders. "Today is about us." Susan smiled, pride shining in her eyes. "That's my girl. Now let's fix your makeup and get you married." As I walked down the aisle of the garden venue, surrounded by blooming roses and the soft strains of a string quartet, I focused on Daniel's face. His eyes shone with love and awe as he watched me approach, and for a moment the ache of my parents' absence receded. The seats reserved for them remained conspicuously empty, but I refused to let that emptiness define my day. We exchanged vows beneath an arch adorned with white roses and eucalyptus, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life might bring. When Daniel slipped the ring onto my finger and said, "With this ring I thee wed," his voice thick with emotion, I felt a sense of belonging I'd been searching for my entire life. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant declared, and as Daniel's lips met mine, applause erupted from our gathered friends and chosen family. The reception was a blur of congratulations, dancing, and laughter. Daniel's parents, who had welcomed me with open arms from the beginning, made heartfelt speeches about their joy at gaining a daughter. Friends from work and college shared stories and raised toasts to our future. For hours, I managed to push aside the dull ache of rejection and focus on the celebration. But as the night wore on and the alcohol flowed, the weight of my parents' absence grew heavier. I found myself stepping away from the festivities, seeking a moment of solitude on the venue's stone terrace overlooking the Pacific Ocean. There's my beautiful wife. Daniel's voice came from behind me, followed by his warm arms encircling my waist. I've been looking for you. I leaned back against his chest, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Sorry, I just needed some air. You're thinking about them, aren't you? He asked gently. I nodded, unable to deny it. I keep telling myself it doesn't matter, that I'm used to being their second choice. But it still hurts, Daniel. After all these years, it still hurts so much. Of course it does, he said, turning me to face him. And you have every right to feel hurt. What they did, what they've always done, is wrong. But Natalie, their absence says nothing about your worth and everything about their failures as parents. Tears welled in my eyes. I wish I could believe that. It's true, he insisted. Look at all the people who showed up today to celebrate you. Look at all you've accomplished despite never having their support. You're brilliant, compassionate, and stronger than you know, and I am so proud to call you my wife. I managed a watery smile. How do you always know exactly what to say? It's easy when it's the truth, he replied, wiping away a tear that had escaped down my cheek. We returned to the reception hand in hand, and I tried to immerse myself in the joy of the moment, but a seed of resolution had been planted. I was tired of being the forgotten daughter, the perpetual afterthought. For years, I had swallowed my pain and made excuses for my parents' behavior. I had convinced myself that if I just achieved more, if I just became enough, they would finally see me. But as I danced with my new husband under the stars, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for me, I realized I was already enough. I had always been enough. And it was time my parents understood that. 3 days after the wedding, still aglow with the joy of our intimate ceremony despite the conspicuous absence of my parents, I sat on the balcony of our beachfront honeymoon suite, scrolling through photos on my phone. Daniel was still asleep, his gentle snores drifting through the open doors behind me. My thumb hovered over my mother's contact information. I had sent her several pictures from the wedding yesterday, hoping for some acknowledgement, some small sign that she regretted missing such an important day. Her response had been brief and impersonal. Looks lovely, hope you had a wonderful day. Claire's exhibition was a tremendous success. Several pieces sold to notable collectors. No congratulations, no apology for her absence, just another reminder that Claire's accomplishments would always overshadow my existence. Something inside me snapped. After years of quiet acceptance, of making myself smaller to accommodate their indifference, I was done. I deserved better. I deserved parents who showed up, who celebrated my victories, who loved me unconditionally. I called my mother's number, my heart pounding in my chest. Natalie, she answered, sounding surprised. Is everything all right? Aren't you on your honeymoon? Yes, I am, I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. I wanted to talk to you about the wedding. Oh yes, it looked very nice from the photos. The venue was lovely. You would have known that if you'd been there, I said, the words sharper than I'd intended. A pause. Natalie, we explained this. Claire's exhibition was more important than your daughter's wedding. I got that message loud and clear. That's not fair, my mother protested. Claire's been working toward this opportunity for years. We couldn't miss her big moment. And what about my big moment? I demanded, my voice rising despite my efforts to contain it. What about all the big moments you've missed throughout my life? My graduation, my promotion, my engagement party. We sent gifts, she interrupted, defensive now. We called to congratulate you. That's not the same as being there, Mom. That's not the same as showing your daughter that she matters to you. Of course you matter to us, she said, but her tone lacked conviction. You've always been so independent, Natalie. You've never seemed to need us the way Claire does. I laughed bitterly. I needed you. I've always needed you. I just learned not to show it because it never made a difference. That's not true. It is true, I cut her off. My entire life, I've watched you and Dad fawn over Claire while barely acknowledging my existence. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To constantly be compared to your sister and found wanting? To achieve things that should make a parent proud, only to have them dismissed as insignificant? We've never dismissed your achievements, my mother protested weakly. Really, when I got that scholarship to Berkeley, Dad's exact words were, "That's nice, but did you hear Claire got into Yale?" When I landed my first major engineering project, you changed the subject to Claire's gallery opening. When I called to tell you Daniel had proposed, you spent 15 minutes talking about Claire's new boyfriend. My mother was silent for a long moment. I don't remember things that way, she finally said. Of course you don't, I replied, my anger giving way to a bone-deep sadness. You don't remember because you weren't paying attention? You've never paid attention to me, not really. Natalie, you're being melodramatic. Her dismissal was like a slap. After everything I'd just shared, after laying bare the pain I'd carried for years, she couldn't even acknowledge the validity of my feelings. I'm not being melodramatic, I said quietly. I'm finally standing up for myself, and I want you to know that I'm done trying to earn your love. I'm done competing with Claire for a place in your lives. I've built a beautiful life without your support, and I'll continue to do so. What are you saying? Her voice held a note of alarm now. I'm saying that unless you're willing to acknowledge how you've hurt me and make real changes, I don't want you in my life anymore. I deserve better than being someone's afterthought. Natalie, you can't possibly mean. I do mean it, Moms. Ball's in your court now. Talk to Dad, think about what I've said, and decide if having a relationship with me is worth the effort. I won't be calling again until I hear from you. I ended the call before she could respond, my hands trembling but my heart lighter than it had felt in years. Daniel appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his face. You okay? He asked softly. I looked up at him, my vision blurry with unshed tears. Actually, I think I am. For the first time in a long time, I really think I am. He sat beside me, taking my hand in his. I'm proud of you, Nat. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, I admitted. But it was necessary. I can't keep expecting them to change if I'm not willing to change how I interact with them. Daniel nodded, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. Whatever happens next, I'm here. We're in this together. I leaned my head against his shoulder, drawing strength from his unwavering support. Together, I echoed. The days turned into weeks, and my parents' response to my ultimatum was telling in its absence. No calls, no texts, no acknowledgement of our conversation. It hurt, but not in the raw, desperate way it once would have. Instead, there was a dull ache tinged with resignation and, surprisingly, relief. The silence confirmed what I had always suspected. Their love was conditional, and I had finally stopped meeting their conditions. Meanwhile, I thrived. My career at the architectural engineering firm was flourishing, with my innovative designs for earthquake-resistant structures earning recognition from industry leaders. Daniel and I settled into married life with an ease that sometimes took my breath away. For the first time, I was living life on my own terms, without the constant shadow of parental disappointment looming over me. It was nearly 2 months after the wedding when my phone rang with my father's number. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, before answering with a cautious, hello. Natalie, my father's voice was stiff, formal. Your mother says you're upset with us. No preamble, no acknowledgement of the weeks of silence. Typical. That's putting it mildly, I replied, keeping my tone even. Did she explain why? A pause. She mentioned something about the wedding, about us choosing Claire's exhibition. Natalie, you have to understand, Claire needed us there. She was nervous and... And I didn't need you at my wedding, I interrupted. Dad, this isn't just about the wedding, it's about a lifetime of feeling invisible in my own family. That's ridiculous, he scoffed. We've provided everything you could need. Accept your attention, accept your approval, accept the basic acknowledgement that my accomplishments matter too. We've always been proud of you, he insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. Have you? Because I can't remember the last time either of you told me that. I can't remember the last time you showed up for me the way you always show up for Claire. Claire is different, my father said defensively. She's more sensitive, she needs more support. And I don't, I asked incredulously. Or is it that you've conditioned Claire to depend on your approval while teaching me that I'll never have it no matter what I achieve? His sharp intake of breath told me I'd struck a nerve. That's not fair, Natalie. None of this is fair, Dad. It never has been. A tense silence stretched between us. Finally, he said, I don't know what you want from us. I want you to acknowledge how your favoritism has hurt me. I want you to make a genuine effort to be present in my life, to celebrate my successes the way you celebrate Claire's. I want you to love me for who I am, not for how I compare to my sister. Another lengthy pause. I think you're overreacting, he said at last. We've never treated you differently. I closed my eyes, a wave of disappointment washing over me. That's exactly what I was afraid you'd say. Natalie. No, Dad, I've said my piece. Unless you're willing to admit there's a problem, nothing will change, and I'm not going to keep subjecting myself to the same hurt over and over. So what, you're cutting us out of your life? His voice rose with indignation. After everything we've done for you. I'm protecting myself, I corrected him, and I'm giving you space to decide if having a relationship with me is worth examining your own behavior. The door isn't closed, but I won't be the one to walk through it first. Not this time. I ended the call, a strange calm settling over me. I had said everything I needed to say, laid bare years of hurt and disappointment. The ball was in their court now. Days passed with no word from either of my parents. I threw myself into work, focusing on a major project that required all my attention and expertise. Daniel was my constant support, never pushing me to talk about my family, but always ready to listen when I needed to vent my frustrations. It was Aunt Susan who called with the news, her voice cautious. Claire's coming to San Diego next week. Your parents are flying in for her visit. My stomach clenched. Why are you telling me this? Because I think you should meet with them, Natalie. All of you, including Claire, it's time for an honest conversation. I've tried having honest conversations with them, Susan. They're not interested in hearing what I have to say. Maybe not, she conceded, but I've been talking to your mother and I think you've rattled her. She's defensive, but she's also confused. Your father, too, they genuinely don't see what they've done wrong. That's part of the problem, I said bitterly. I know, but Natalie, if you want things to change, someone has to take the first step, and I think it needs to be you, even though that's not fair. I sighed, recognizing the truth in her words, when and where. We arranged to meet at Susan's house the following Saturday. The days leading up to the confrontation were filled with anxiety, but also determination. I spent hours practicing what I wanted to say, rehearsing the facts and examples I wanted to present. Daniel offered to come with me, but I declined. This was something I needed to do alone. As I pulled into Susan's driveway, I spotted my parents' rental car already parked at the curb. My pulse quickened, but I took a deep breath, centering myself. I was not the insecure, approval-seeking daughter anymore. I was a successful professional, a loving wife, a woman who knew her own worth. Susan met me at the door, her expression sympathetic. There in the living room, Claire's not here yet, she texted that she's running late. Of course she was. Claire's time had always been considered more valuable than anyone else's. I stepped into the living room to find my parents perched awkwardly on Susan's floral sofa. My mother's face was a mask of careful neutrality, while my father couldn't quite hide his discomfort. Neither moved to embrace me. Natalie, my mother said, her voice unnaturally bright, you look well. Thanks, I replied, taking a seat across from them. How was your flight? Small talk, the refuge of the emotionally avoidant. We exchanged pleasantries about the weather, their hotel, my recent work projects. The tension in the room was palpable, a living thing that seemed to suck the oxygen from the air. Finally, the sound of the front door opening broke the strained atmosphere. Claire swept in, as radiant and self-assured as ever. Her blonde hair was styled in elegant waves, her designer outfit impeccable. She looked every inch the successful artist she was. Sorry I'm late, she announced without sounding particularly sorry. Traffic was a nightmare. My parents immediately brightened at her arrival, their postures relaxing, their smiles becoming genuine. The transformation was so obvious, so painful to witness that I felt a sharp twinge in my chest. Claire hugged our parents before turning to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Natalie, congratulations on your wedding, the photos looked gorgeous. Thanks, I said, accepting her brief, perfunctory hug. Congratulations on your exhibition, I heard it was a success. It was amazing, she gushed, launching into a detailed account of the notable attendees, the positive reviews, the pieces she'd sold. My parents listened with rapt attention, interjecting questions and expressing pride in her accomplishments. I sat silently, watching the familiar dynamic play out. It was as if I wasn't even in the room. Susan caught my eye from the doorway, her expression encouraging. Say something, her look seemed to urge. I cleared my throat. I'm glad we could all get together today. There's something important I want to discuss. My mother's smile faltered. Yes, of course, Susan mentioned you wanted to talk. I do, I confirmed, steeling myself. I want to talk about why you weren't at my wedding. The room grew still. Claire shifted uncomfortably in her seat while my father's expression hardened. We've already explained this, Natalie, he said. Claire's exhibition was the same day, I know, and you chose to attend her event instead of your daughter's wedding. It wasn't a choice between, my mother began. It was exactly that, I interrupted, and you chose Claire just like you've always chosen Claire. Claire frowned. That's not fair, Natalie. My exhibition was a huge opportunity for my career. And my wedding wasn't a huge moment in my life, I countered. Claire, this isn't actually about you. It's about a pattern that's existed my entire life. What pattern? My father demanded. We've supported both of you equally. I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. That is absolutely not true, and the fact that you can say that with a straight face shows just how blind you are to your own behavior. Natalie, my mother said warningly. No, Mom, I've stayed silent for too long. Do you want to know why I stopped sharing things with you? Why I don't call as often as Claire does? It's because every time I've reached out, every time I've shared an achievement or a struggle, you've either dismissed it or found a way to turn the conversation back to Claire. That's ridiculous, my father scoffed. Is it? When I graduated with honors, you spent the entire celebration dinner talking about Claire's latest gallery showing. When I got promoted to lead engineer on the Riverside project, the youngest person in the firm's history to hold that position, you changed the subject to Claire's new studio space. When I called to tell you I was engaged, Mom spent 15 minutes gushing about Claire's new boyfriend. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. Claire stared at the floor, her cheeks flushed. Those are isolated incidents, my mother protested weakly. They're not isolated, they're examples of a lifelong pattern. You have consistently shown me that Claire's accomplishments matter more, that her needs come first, that her presence is valued while mine is tolerated. That's not true, my father insisted, though with less conviction than before. It is true, Susan interjected quietly. I've seen it too, Robert. Every family gathering, every holiday, every milestone, you and Linda have always put Claire center stage while relegating Natalie to the wings. My mother looked stricken. Susan, that's a terrible thing to say. It's the truth, I said, feeling a surge of gratitude toward my aunt. And it's damaged me in ways I'm only beginning to understand. Do you know how many years I spent thinking I wasn't good enough? How hard I pushed myself, hoping that if I just achieved a little more, worked a little harder, you might finally be proud of me the way you're proud of Claire. Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them back, determined to remain composed. The worst part is, I don't think you even realize you're doing it. It's so ingrained that it's become your normal. But it's not normal and it's not okay. A heavy silence fell over the room. My father looked pained, my mother tearful. Claire was still studying the carpet, her shoulders hunched. What do you want from us, Natalie? My father finally asked, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. I want you to acknowledge what you've done. I want you to understand how your behavior has hurt me. And I want you to make a genuine effort to change, not just with empty promises, but with consistent actions. My mother wiped at her eyes. We never meant to hurt you. We love you, Natalie. I believe you think you do, I said softly. But love isn't just a feeling, Mom. It's how you treat someone, it's showing up when it matters. It's celebrating their victories and supporting them through their struggles. It's seeing them for who they are, not who you want them to be or how they compare to someone else. Claire suddenly stood up. I need some air, she mumbled, hurrying from the room. I watched her go, a complicated mix of emotions swirling inside me. Claire had been the favored child, but she hadn't created the dynamic. That responsibility lay with our parents. I should go check on her, my mother said automatically, starting to rise. No, I said firmly, for once stay and finish a conversation with me. To my surprise, she sank back down onto the sofa. We didn't realize, my father said slowly, we didn't see what we were doing. I know, I replied. That's why I'm telling you now as clearly as I can. I want a relationship with you both, but not if it continues like this. I deserve better. My mother nodded, tears streaming down her face. You do, she whispered. You deserve so much better than what we've given you. Her admission, so unexpected, caught me off guard. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine remorse in my mother's eyes, a painful recognition of her own failings. I'm sorry, Natalie, she continued, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry we missed your wedding. I'm sorry for all the times we made you feel less than. You're our daughter and we've failed you terribly. My father cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional turn the conversation had taken. Your mother's right, he said gruffly. We've been blind and that's on us, not you. I hadn't expected this, hadn't dared to hope for acknowledgement, let alone apology. Tears spilled down my cheeks as years of pent-up pain began to release. Thank you, I managed. That means a lot to me. Susan slipped quietly from the room, giving us privacy. After a moment's hesitation, my mother moved to sit beside me on the couch, tentatively taking my hand. I don't know if we can fix this, she said honestly, but I want to try if you'll let us. Me too, I admitted, but it has to be different, real change, not just words. She nodded, squeezing my hand. It will be, I promise. My father joined us, his expression more open than I could ever remember seeing it. We're proud of you, Natalie, he said. We should have told you that more often, we should have shown you. The three of us sat together, the air between us clearer than it had been in years. It wasn't a perfect resolution, there were still hurts to heal, patterns to break, trust to rebuild, but it was a beginning. Claire returned eventually, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She sat across from us, looking more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I never realized, I never saw how they treated you differently. It's not your fault, I assured her, meaning it. You didn't create the dynamic. But I benefited from it, she acknowledged, and I never questioned it or stood up for you. I nodded, appreciating her honesty. Maybe we can start fresh, I suggested, get to know each other as adults without all the baggage and competition. She smiled hesitantly. I'd like that. The conversation continued well into the evening, painful at times but necessary. We unearthed old hurts, acknowledged hard truths, and cautiously began to imagine a new kind of relationship, one built on mutual respect and genuine connection rather than old patterns and expectations. As I drove home that night, exhaustion and relief competed within me. I had no illusions that one conversation, however productive, could undo decades of damage. The road ahead would be long and likely bumpy. But for the first time in my life, I felt a genuine hope that my relationship with my family could change. Daniel was waiting up for me, concern etched on his face. "How did it go?" he asked as I collapsed onto the couch beside him. "Surprisingly well," I admitted. "They actually listened, they apologized, it was not what I expected." He pulled me close, pressing a kiss to my temple. "I'm so proud of you, Nat, that took incredible courage." I leaned into his embrace, grateful beyond words for his unwavering support. It felt like the first real conversation I've ever had with them, like they finally saw me. "That's because you made yourself impossible to ignore," he said. "You stood up for what you deserve." I nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle in my bones. I had spent so long trying to earn my parents' love and attention, contorting myself to fit their expectations, shrinking to accommodate their favoritism. But in finally standing my ground, in refusing to accept less than I deserved, I had found something more valuable than their approval: my own voice, my own power. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of tentative steps forward and occasional stumbles backward. My parents made efforts, calling more frequently, asking about my work with genuine interest, acknowledging when old patterns threatened to resurface. I, in turn, tried to approach our relationship with openness rather than defensive expectation. 3 months after our confrontation, I discovered I was pregnant. Daniel and I were overjoyed, if a little terrified at the prospect of becoming parents. When I called to share the news with my parents, their excitement seemed authentic, not measured against some invisible standard, not immediately followed by a pivot to Claire's latest accomplishment. "This is wonderful news, Natalie," my mother gushed. "Oh, I can hardly believe it, we're going to be grandparents." "We are," I confirmed, smiling at the warmth in her voice. "I'm due in early spring." "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Have you had much morning sickness? I was terribly ill with both you and Claire." The conversation continued, focused entirely on me and my pregnancy. It felt strange, almost disorienting to have my mother's undivided attention, but it also felt right, the way it should have been all along. As I hung up the phone, I placed a hand on my still flat stomach, a fierce protectiveness washing over me. The child growing inside me would never know the pain of feeling invisible in their own family. They would be cherished for exactly who they were, celebrated for their unique gifts and passions. The cycle of favoritism and emotional neglect would end with me. Standing by the window of our beachfront apartment, watching the waves crash against the shore, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. My journey was far from over. There would be more difficult conversations, more old wounds to heal, more growth to embrace. But I had found my voice, claimed my worth, and begun to forge a future built on genuine love and acceptance. For so long, I had been the shadow to Claire's light. But shadows aren't nothing, they're evidence of substance, of presence, of standing one's ground. And sometimes, when the light shifts just right, they can be the darkest, most powerful thing in the room. I wasn't a shadow anymore. I was Natalie, engineer, wife, soon to be mother, and finally, a daughter who demanded to be seen.